Hey everybody, good to see you. Hope you're doing fantastic. I'm really excited about this as we are going to continue on with that series we've been doing called Rewired, which is all about getting rid of those beliefs, those limiting beliefs that hold you back in your life and in your business, which is really important for us to address, right? Because for those of us who are in this group, we're coaching, we're creating courses, we are putting ourselves out there to help other people. And there's something vulnerable about doing that. So anyways, if I have seen one thing over and over, I've seen it in my own life, I've seen it in our clients' lives, is that it's usually not a knowledge problem to pull off these projects. It's an inner game problem. And so we're going to go ahead and jump back into part 2 of our series that we've been doing on Rewired. So anyways, hopefully you can see my screen here. And we did part 1 about 2 weeks ago, and I gave you an exercise for you to do, and hopefully you've done that, because that'll make this one make a whole lot more sense. So anyways, if you're just joining us, great to have you guys here live, and for those who are watching this on the replay, awesome to have you here as well. So this session is called Fractal Stories, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a moment. But again, if you have not gone through part 1 of this training, make sure that you do that. And you will find that here on the page somewhere. I'm not on the page right now, so I can't even show you where. But anyways, the reason I call this Fractal Stories is because I want you to think about how our brain works in terms of how we make sense of the world. We are always trying to assign meaning to things, and so we create stories. That's really what we do. We create these stories, and your life is built on stories, by the way. It's like an entire library of stories that then dictate how you live your future. And some of those stories are great. They're empowering. They get the best out of you. And some of them are disempowering. Some are outright horror stories. And they steal your best from you and from everyone else. And so we definitely want to make sure that we're dealing with those. So we're going to talk about this today. Now, remember when we kicked this off 2 weeks ago, I shared this analogy about the girl who's playing poker. And if you remember, I said, well, how do you play? And how does she play? And a lot of this is dictated by how many chips you feel like you have. Because we can't always control the cards that are dealt to us in life. And so often how we play is how much we have to lose. And if you've got only a couple of chips left, you tend to play really conservative. But if you got a lot of chips, hey, you take chances, you take risks. If you lose, no problem. And so what happens is that when we don't have the confidence and when we have these limiting beliefs that are holding us back, it's like we're playing our hands with only 1 or 2 chips. And it's really hard to be successful at that point. So also last time in version 1, I gave you an exercise called turning on the lights and the emotions color wheel. So again, if you don't know about that, go back and watch that training, because this one won't quite make as much sense. So anyways, hopefully you had a chance to do that, because I told you that today I was going to introduce you to something called the miracle question. All right, the miracle question. Honest to goodness, this is going to change your life. And I don't say that lightly. This question is going to change your life. So before we get to the miracle question, though, let's go ahead and jump back into this turning on the lights exercise. And so let's say this is somebody who wrote down answers to all these 3 things. Remember, I talked about what you're looking for is the anxiety, right? Where does the anxiety show up? And then what was the thought? Like, what made you anxious? And then to think, well, why might this thought actually be valid? And why might this thought not be valid? So we're going to look at that. Then we're going to look at what's the emotion, and then, hey, what happened? So let's just look at one of these for time's sake. We're going to the very bottom. So let's say you're selling your online course, or you're selling a coaching program or whatever, and you get on the phone with somebody, and so far it's a pretty good call. And then at the end, they're like, okay, so how much do you charge? And all of a sudden, you feel this tightness, because on the call, you realize, and this is what the person wrote down, it says, what's the situation? I had a sales call with a prospective client. She is very successful. And as she heard how this other woman on the other line was very, very successful, she began to get doubts. She began to have anxiety. And it was, hey, maybe she should be coaching me. That was the thought. And that turned into, she probably has some things she could teach me. Like, what's valid about that thought? And what might not be valid? Well, she is looking for help to grow, which is why she called me, and I can do that. But what was the emotion? So she drilled down and she found out what the emotion. It was just this emotion of feeling inadequate, feeling like I can't do this, like I am not enough. And then, hey, what happened? I was nervous, all the call, and I hesitated when I told her my price. So we can see that's kind of the thing. So anyways, like I said, what we're looking for when we do an exercise like this is we are looking for what was the emotion. Because this is going to lead us to that miracle question that is going to be one of the keys to you changing, to you growing. Because when you can identify the emotion, because think about this, emotions are, they're like a state that we get into. It just washes over us, like emotion washes over us. It's basically just neurochemicals, right? But that's not what we think. We just have a feeling. And so what helps is when we can pair that feeling to the rigid structure of language. And then when we can name it, it helps us. And that's why I gave you that color wheel, so you could do that. And so she's able to take a look at some of the emotions that she was feeling. And then after that, we're going to ask the miracle question. And the miracle question is this: what does someone have to believe to feel that feeling? What does someone have to believe to feel that feeling? Because I want you to think about this. You don't have those feelings unless some belief has been triggered. You see, a lot of our limiting beliefs, they just lie dormant. Like they lie dormant in the bottom of the ocean until we trigger them. And of course, we trigger them by when we go off script, when we go outside our map that our brain has created for us to stay safe. And so when we do that, anxiety gets triggered, but it's because we are actually treading on, there's this belief that's coming up. But what does someone have to believe to feel that feeling? Like, what do I have to believe to feel inadequate on a sales call of somebody who's called me to get my help? What do I have to believe to feel anxious or nervous or scared if I tell a joke among friends and then a couple of people didn't laugh, and then I start to get insecure and thinking like, oh, did someone get offended? Like, what do I have to believe to feel that feeling? I'll probably have to believe something like, oh, like if everyone in this room doesn't approve of me, I'm not enough. And so if you remember, let me see if I can get this slide to come up. So if you remember this from last time, I talked about how the emotion is kind of what shows up above the ground, but the belief is what's driving it down beneath. So a lot of people will tell you like, oh, like change the emotion, right? Change the state. And yeah, there is wisdom in that, but that's temporary. It's a temporary fix to all of a sudden, like you're feeling a certain emotion, like, okay, yeah, move your body. You can do things like that. Change what you're focused on. Go run around the block. Put on some music and dance around and move your body. Absolutely. You can change your state like that. The problem is, if you haven't dealt with the root, you're going to have to keep doing that again and again and again. And in this business, when you're trying to help people with your expertise and your knowledge, you got to be certain. You got to be confident. Because if you're not, first of all, people will sense that. They'll sense that doubt in you. But the other thing is, you will not enjoy yourself because you're going to be constantly like, oh, I'm feeling it again. Let me go run around the block. And you go run around the block. Okay, feel better. Then you jump on another sales call or you get on an email with somebody. And then, oh, I'm feeling the anxiety again. Better go run around the block. And so you might lose like 40 pounds. Okay, that's great. But that's not sustainable. And so what we got to do is we have to deal with this root belief that's causing the problem. And these beliefs, again, where do they come from? They come from our stories. So our stories are experiences that we have in our life, and they tend to stack. So we have an experience, and we're trying to figure out the meaning of it, often in our formative years, and we create a story. Maybe you got bullied in middle school, and out of that experience, which was painful, which was traumatic, you created a story, which anchored in a belief that then stays with you, many people, for the rest of their life, and will hinder them and will hold them back. So Dr. James Hollis, who's just a fantastic psychotherapist, a Jungian psychoanalyst, and he's written some amazing books. I had a chance to interview him for a podcast. And he says we all live in haunted houses. And what he means is that we are all haunted by the scripts or the ghosts of our past, that they keep coming up. And sometimes they full out invade us like a possession, and they take over. And that's happened to all of us. Like, have you ever had a moment where all of a sudden you just acted so irrationally, or you lost your cool, you lost your temper, or you were rude to somebody, you snapped at somebody, and later on you're like, oh my goodness, that is not me. Well, what happened? It's like somebody took over your body, like someone possessed you. Well, you know what possessed you? The stories from the past. That's what possessed you in those moments. And so that's why Dr. Hollis says we all live in these haunted houses, because we have these beliefs that they run our lives more than we want to give them credit for, right? But hey, it's our life, so we want to make sure that we take it back. And so again, where do these stories come from? Like, what if you're on a sales call with somebody and you start to feel anxious? That's coming from a belief, which is coming from a story. Well, where did that story come from? Or if you go to do a Facebook Live, and because you're trying to build your community, and so you go to hit go live, and all of a sudden you're like, you feel nervous. Why? Where is that coming from? It's coming from a story. It's coming from a belief that you have about yourself, about life, about your tribe, whatever it might be. Versus if somebody could just come along and like snip whatever wires were connecting that, you'd pick up your phone and you would just click go live. There'd be no emotion at all, because it wouldn't be attached to a story. Why do you think people behave differently when they're intoxicated with some substance, right? Drugs or alcohol? Is it numbs our inhibitions, right? It numbs our stories. And so we're able to be more spontaneous and more authentic, and sometimes that's not a good thing either. So anyways, where do these stories come from? You know, an interesting exercise, we're not going to do this now, but when you look at your life, and I did this one time, I went back and I looked at my life and I just walked through the memory of it. And I noticed there were a couple of catalyst events, seminal events that happened that shaped how I think, shaped how who I am. And you'll find it as well. So let's say, the woman in this example here, let's say for her, in middle school, she got in an argument with her best friend, Sarah, and then Sarah turned kind of the whole class against her because Sarah was more popular. And all of a sudden, we'll just call her Michelle. Michelle was on the outside, and this didn't go on for a week. This went on for 3 months, and she had no friends. It was like being excommunicated, right? Being kicked outside of the city. And all of a sudden now, she was just like, that's traumatic, especially when you're, 11 years old. Well, events like that, they play a role in our life. And, again, we all the way through, what we'll see is sometimes we'll see these stories repeat and strengthen and gain speed. And so pretty soon, Michelle creates this belief, hey, it's dangerous if someone disagrees with you. Because that happened to me once, and I was ostracized. Now, we don't consciously think that, but I'm telling you, our brain, that protective part of our brain that's making sure we're going to stay safe, is going to alert you anytime that you might be potentially rocking the boat. You post something on Facebook, and then somebody all of a sudden doesn't like your post, and then so you delete your post because, oh my goodness, I don't want to offend people. And what that is you're serving a past story. So, is this making sense? Is this making sense so far? So I want you to imagine that. And by the way, here's one of the ways that we start to separate ourselves, because that's the problem. These stories they're part of us, right? They're ingrained in us. And so one of the things we have to do is we have to start to separate them so we can see them for what they are. That all of our stories, are not even the truth. All of our stories are just interpretations of events. They're just our interpretations. In fact, it's no one else's interpretation. It's just our interpretation. So I want you to imagine for a moment that Michelle is able to start to see that, oh, you know what? Some of these moments in my life really impacted me, like that time Sarah did that in middle school, and that set off a new story, which then I reinforced all throughout my life. And so, and what she's realized is that it's dangerous to upset people because they may not approve of me. And she's realized that's a belief. That's a belief she has. See, one of the things about limiting beliefs, they're often embarrassing when we're really honest, because no one wants to admit these things. But what we have to do, what you've got to do is to have no judgment when you look at your own limiting beliefs. Because you might be tempted to go, that is so pathetic, right? Like, that is so pathetic. Surely I don't believe that. But you can't have judgment and just be like, hey, you know what? Here's the belief. It's dangerous to upset people because then they may not approve of me. And you could even take that one further. And if they don't approve of me, then I'm not enough, or I'm not worthy, or I have no worth. Who wants to admit that? But yet that's a common story for so many people. So have no judgment here. But now imagine for a moment, this is a really powerful exercise. Imagine for a moment that we could take that moment for that moment in time for Michelle when her and Sarah got in the fight and then Sarah turned everybody against her. If we could have that on recorded and put in our VHS tape, because it would be old, right? So we're going to put in the VHS tape and we're going to watch it again. Although this time we're not in the story, we're watching the story. And at the same time, we've brought a bunch of our friends over because we were like, hey, I want you to watch what happened to me. And so our friends watch the story. And then we ask our friends what they thought. And we're surprised because our friends have a different interpretation of that event than we have. So it might look like this. Your one friend comes over and she might say, oh, what is she going to say? She says, Sarah was just jealous as she lashed out at you. That's what kids do. Had nothing to do with don't upset people because then they may not approve of you. You're just dealing with a jealous 11-year-old. And then someone else, they weigh in, another friend, and they're like, this is how middle schoolers behave. But now even Sarah would feel terrible about that. Sarah would never want that to happen to her own kids. And someone else weighs in, and this is Renee, and Renee says, look how scared everyone else was. No one had the courage to stand up to Sarah except for you. So he even spins it that, hey, like at least you had the courage. No one else did. And all of a sudden now Michelle is faced with the fact that there are more than one interpretation for the same event, which means that her interpretation may not be correct. And this is such a huge step when we are starting to identify some of our limiting beliefs. Because as you'll see the next time, I can't cover all this today, but one of the keys for us in making long-term change is shifting these beliefs. But how we do that is we have to introduce doubt. We have to discredit them, right? We have to introduce doubt, and we do that by understanding there's other truths out there. Oh, so my interpretation isn't the only interpretation. This changes now how I begin to see the moment again, because it may not be what I've thought. So every event has multiple possible meanings. But see, what happens is we just go through life and we're just not aware. We're not even aware of what's going on for us. We just deal with these emotions. They come up. We have these avoidance patterns. And so we don't go on Facebook Live. We don't send an email. We don't launch a course. We don't try to close a sale because it's just, and so we just live in this loop. But if you want to get out of that loop, then you got to deal with these limiting beliefs, and you deal with that miracle question. Hey, what does someone have to believe to be feeling these things that I'm feeling? Because that belief is at the core. And where did that belief come from? And it usually didn't come from just one moment. It may have had a catalyst, but it has many different meanings for sure. So every event has multiple possible meanings. In other words, the story you wrote from all the events in your life is going to be different than maybe the story from someone else if they looked at your life. Every event has multiple possible meanings. And so lenses change how we see reality. And I want you to think about this for a minute. For those of you who wear glasses, I don't know who wears glasses or contacts. I wear glasses only to see far away, but I can see just fine without them. So the thing about glasses, when you're wearing them, the goal of the glasses is not to see the glasses, but the glasses change your reality. They don't change reality. They change how you see reality, right? And so that's what lenses do. And so there's good lenses and bad lenses. The only time you notice the lens is when something gets on them. And so all of a sudden you notice, for those of you who wear glasses, like your glasses just get dirty or something gets on them. And now you're like, oh, there's something on my glasses. And it's only then that you take them off and you clean them. So this is a similar thing that has to happen in your life, is that you have to see the lens. You have to see the lens, and the way you do that is by paying attention to that emotion that comes up and then going, hey, where's this coming from? Oh, this is the emotion. What does someone have to believe to actually feel that emotion there? And now you're looking at the lens, and now you can see, is this a good lens or not? And if it's not a good lens, then you know, okay, now I got to root out this belief because it is holding me back, and that's no good. So again, every event has multiple meanings. So let's take this a step further. Who wrote the current story that I've been reading? So whatever the limiting belief is, when you do this exercise, and maybe you find out that you have this belief that making mistakes are bad. To make a mistake is bad. So what happens? You won't make mistakes. You'll try to be perfect. You'll be a perfectionist. You won't take risks. If people don't like me, there's something wrong with me. That might be a belief that you have. And so you never want to upset anybody. If I post on my Facebook page about my business and what I'm doing, my friends from high school might see it, or my siblings might see it, or my friends from church might see it. And what might they think? There's a belief driving that. What is it? It's probably something like, if my tribe doesn't approve of me, then I'm less. I'm not worthy. I'm not enough. Again, these are, when you start to say them, they sound like embarrassing, but you can't be embarrassed by it. Just be like, oh, that's interesting. You got to be the scientist here. Like, that is interesting. Where in the world did I get that belief? It's like when a child comes to you and they're like, hey, and they throw at some crazy belief, and you're like, who told you that? Right? Who told you that? And here's the thing. It's the same question. Who told you that? Hey, if I upset people, then that's dangerous. Who told you that? I'm going to tell you who told you that. Because who wrote the current story that you've been reading? Like, who did that? You realize it's you. And this is the ownership part. When you realize that I've created every belief that's contributed to my lack of confidence. And some people want to fight that. Go, no, you don't understand what's happened to me, and this happened to me, and that happened to me. Hey, I get it. Some terrible things happened to us. Some terrible, terrible things happened to us. Like I said earlier, we can't control the cards we're dealt. And some of us are dealt harder cards than others. But even in those moments, we cope. We cope by creating stories. And those stories are meant to protect us. They're meant to be protective, right? They're meant to be protective. And so what happens is they're meant to be protective, and they are for a while, but then we outgrow them. So again, it still comes back to, I've created every belief that's contributing to my lack of confidence. I've created every belief that's contributed to my perfectionism. I've created every belief that's contributing to my, even the source of my anxiety about putting myself out there. That's hard, right? It's hard to swallow. But if you do, so the silver lining in all of this, which means that I have the power to recreate these beliefs. When you see that you've created every belief that's contributing to whatever it is that you don't like, it also means that you have the power to recreate these beliefs. You have the power to work on the old ones, and you have the power to install new ones. And this stuff doesn't happen overnight, despite what some people want to try to convince you. But in every real way, you are the creator of your life. Now, some people, when I say this, I say like, you're the creator of your life. Some people want to say, well, no, I believe God's a creator. Hey, yeah, I believe God created you. I don't know what you believe, but I'm just saying, I believe God created you. But once he did, then he turned the keys over to me and says, now you're the creator of your life. And so you can create a great life by being filled with gratitude, focusing on good things, going out, loving people, taking care of people. Or you can build a terrible life by always looking at the glass as half empty, looking at what you don't have, comparing yourselves with others. In other words, the same two twins can go through life, and one can have an amazing life and one can have a terrible life, and it's not about the cards that are dealt them, it's what they created. And so you really are the creator. You are the creator of your life, absolutely. So back to the miracle question. What does someone have to believe to feel that feeling, right? What does someone have to believe to feel that feeling? So we'll continue on with this series, but for right now, I want this to be the next step for you. I want you to start noticing when something's on the lens, going, wait a minute. You don't have to fill out this sheet every time, but I want you to start going through it, these emotions, and asking yourself the question, like, what am I believing right now? What's the story? And then once you see it, okay. Don't even worry about doing anything with it right now, because like I said last time, awareness is partly curative, okay? So that's where we're going to leave it off. Of course, there's no handout with this, but we will continue this on in the next session. We'll take this a step further. I'm telling you, this is so important, and I'm going to share from my personal life. There are so many times my fear of judgment, my fear of upsetting people, my fear of what's the tribe going to think, my fear of I don't want people to see me as this. I don't want people to see me as like salesman. I don't want people to see me as just this guy who's out for their money. Like, just list all the things. There's a belief behind there because, there's people out there that are just trying to take people's money. And of course I don't want to be like that, but I'm not that kind of a person. Right? But the real fear is I don't want people to think of me in a certain way. So I'm going to try to control how people see me, right? And that's exhausting. And it doesn't bring your best self to the world. Okay. Listen, we're going to stop there and leave a comment below this video. Let me know what you thought, and love to hear from you. All right? Take care, guys. See you later. 6